Oddly enough, due to the idiocy of some administrators at Texas A&M, well, we need to defend our name because they made a really strange decision. Linda, let them have it.
Well, yes, and for those of you who missed this, the administration at Texas A&M decided to bow low to the state laws that have to do with eliminating anything that even hints at wokeness, such as gender. So they advised professors at Texas A&M to really take out certain parts of Plato from their syllabi. And this meant that one professor of philosophy noted that this really made him wonder what kind of university they were talking about if they couldn't teach Plato. Good question, until we remember it was Texas that wanted to put creationism into the textbooks. Other professors have said they're a little bit concerned about maybe they're losing their academic freedom. Surely not.
When you think of modern higher education, we always have to keep in mind that all of this goes back to Plato sitting on a bench talking to young scholars and business people and children of the elite of Athens. This is kind of bizarre. It's the foundation of education.
Excuse me, I guess you forget that sometimes Plato mentions homosexuality.
Oh.
It's just that it's too, gendered. It's too gendered to talk about.
Oh, my.
And, of course, the great irony is that the section in the Republic about Plato's Cave has to do with disabusing people of just this kind of nonsense by stopping, looking at the shadows on the cave, and go out into the real world and see what it's like. But also, the Republic begins with a young man who believes might makes right. And the endeavor within the Republic is to show why that is highly dangerous. So maybe that's why they're banning it.
I think, they're exercising their might to determine what can be taught to young people. That's actually consistent with just about everything that's going on right now. So I guess we shouldn't be surprised. However, we will continue to talk about Plato.
Yes, and name our show after it. And the other thing that I always find fascinating when they want to censor books is what I find so intriguing is that they believe deep in their soul that reading changes people. That reading doesn't just change people, it brainwashes them. You're a teacher. Is that your experience?
Oh, yes. Everything I read contributes to my scholarship and teaching in some way, even things that are unrelated to the subject matter, because we grow. Our ideas change. They evolve. They become more complex. Sometimes they become simpler. That's why we do this, and that's why young people should be allowed to read anything they want. And as soon as somebody tells you you can't read it, get it immediately, because there's something good in there.
Yeah, but Bill, the problem I sometimes had, and I guess you don't because you're teaching that deeply fascinating subject, economics, is getting the students to read it at all was sometimes a challenge.
Well, yeah, it's a challenge, but you know my feeling. You can go to college and education is optional. If a student doesn't want to do the work, that doesn't affect the other students, and it doesn't affect me. So if they decide they're not going to do the reading, who are they depriving?
Oh, well, no, I don't disagree. I just think I just think censorship is predicated on the assumption that if assigned, students will read it and then be changed. I think it's a very idealistic view.
Yeah, when it's assigned, if they read it,
exactly.
We hope they will be changed.
There you go. That's a much better way of saying it. Anyway, the other thing that I know you're not surprised about is that this is coming from, excuse me using this word, administrators.
Of course. course it is. Can you imagine a faculty anywhere getting together and saying, I don't think we can teach Plato? It is, boy, you can't fix dumb.
No, you sure can't. Well, now let's move on. What else are we going to discuss today?
Well, I just want to mention a few things about the economy. The New York Federal Reserve Bank has a research group, as all Federal Reserve Banks do, and they released their information on the state of the economy this week, showing that employment continues to decline, consumption is weakening, and employment is not growing. If anything, it's falling. And they added one more thing, and this is interesting. Delinquencies are increasing. Now, this means that people are stopping paying their bills, that they're not. So that's an indication that they are struggling in a really important way. Given what we have here, we are likely to experience stagflation if we are lucky. We could go into deflation, and that would be extremely dangerous.
So these are the figures for what month?
The last quarter of last year.
Okay.
And they just released them. And you have to note that the Treasury has no control over the Fed's research. Donald Trump has no control over their research. Mm-hmm. The Fed funds the Fed research, right? And they're independent. So how they spend their budget can't be directed by the White House at this point.
So we're looking at what happened in the last quarter, and we have to wait till the end of this quarter to get the results on what's actually happening right now.
Yes, but it's all trending
in the wrong direction. Yeah.
So it confirms things from a really dependable data source.
Yeah.
What else? Oh, yes. ICE has decided to shoot people in cars this week and murdered a woman in Minneapolis.
This is beyond horrible. I realize there's been other shootings, and I don't wish to seem indifferent to them.
Oh, of course, there were 2 in Portland at approximately the same day.
Yeah, but people have been shot, but not necessarily killed. Not that I hate to say that. That doesn't make it any better. The point is, she was killed at point-blank range, shot twice. She was unarmed. How can this be allowed? How can this be something that we go on to the next news cycle with?
And the amazing thing is that there are so many people were filming this. There is a shot from the side, and you can see the officer drawing his weapon before the car moved. So, and of course, immediately Trump and J.D. Vance labeled her a terrorist, and part of a terrorist group. I think that terrorist group's probably really a terrorized group. It's parents. This woman had 3 children.
And she was just there to observe. She knew ICE was in town, and she was trying to do her citizen's duty.
Yeah.
By making sure that ICE understood that she was being watched. And for some reason, they decided to go after her.
And the provocative thing she did was yell, shame, shame, shame at them.
Yeah.
And so they shot her. And the other thing is now the federal government's trying to cover it up. Murder is, of course, a state charge, but they're excluding all local officials' access to any evidence, leaving it in the hands of the FBI, which we know the investigators there have resigned in droves, given the leadership.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a cover-up unless...
This can't be allowed to stand.
No.
It just cannot be allowed to stand.
I was very proud of the mayor of Minneapolis really speaking his mind. I've never dropped an F-bomb, but, it's really important that he put this right in the context where it belongs, in the gutter. This is disgusting.
Yeah. And for Kristi Noem to appear to say, she was violating the law and she was threatening it, wearing the largest 10-gallon hat I've ever seen in my life. Well, what kind of person thinks she has to dress up for everything?
Here's the thing. I lived in the Southwest. You know who wears cowboy hats?
I lived in the part of the world where people wear cowboy hats for a reason. because they're working.
They're working.
Yes.
Yeah.
But one that size, no. That's for when you're going out honky-tonkin'. She just looked ridiculous.
Absolutely. How can anybody take anything she says seriously?
Yeah, but she's talking about murder.
Oh, no. This was self-defense,
Yeah, there's a lot of self-defense involved when you're unarmed and sitting in a car.
And then there was somebody, Newsmax. We all know what Newsmax is, but there were a bunch of clips being shown on MSNBC or whatever it is, MS Now, of Newsmax, saying some guy saying, well, a car is a weapon. It's just like a gun, and stepping on the accelerator is like shooting. I mean, where do they find these morons? I don't think ICE agents get up in the morning and intend to shoot anybody, but they are armed. They are trained. Obviously not enough. Except this was a very experienced person.
Yes, I know.
This is a mistake. But now it's a murder.
Yeah.
There's a cover-up. The cover-up will be worse.
We don't expect people who are trained and armed to lose their temper so they fire into a car more than once. Twice? Why fire at all? What's she doing that's so... Anyway, I think we're all in greater danger than we knew. And I do not wish to gloss over the fact that they're also willing to shoot the people they're supposedly protecting us from. It's just an agency that has to go, period. There's nothing there that is helping America. And in fact, it's engaging in extrajudicial killings. It has to be stopped. When I figure out how, I'll tell you.
Okay, we're going to go on and look at the other atrocity of the week. Of course, Donald Trump displaced the president of Venezuela and kidnapped him and his wife and brought them to the United States and charged them with drug crimes, which will be interesting to see how that goes. But this atrocity, which should be terrifying to everybody in Latin America, and in fact I know for a fact it was because I was with a bunch of Latin American economists. Of course, this has got to terrify people in Colombia, Mexico, and Cuba, who are other likely targets. The amazing thing is what people forget is that the majority of fentanyl and illegal drugs coming in the United States come from Mexico, right?
Oh, and Trump just pardoned
a Honduran drug dealer.
Yeah. This has nothing to do with drugs.
No. And so we're going to take a look at how our little act of piracy at sea, where we captured 2 Venezuelan ships, now up to 5 and counting. These have been labeled, ghost fleets and zombie boats. What is this all about, Linda?
Yeah, I thought we'd better do a deep dive into this to find out if it's legal for us to seize these boats. So let's start with what our loyal listeners already know, and that is what ghost fleets and zombie ships are. But I want to go back to see how they came into being. Price caps and sanctions were imposed on Russia because of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We got that. Okay. Ghost fleets, sometimes called dark fleets or shadow fleets, these are old ships that under normal circumstances would have been scrapped because they're too old to be on the high seas. But with the American and G7 price caps and additional U.S. sanctions on oil from Russia, and I should also add Venezuela, they rose in value. And they are now used to disguise clandestine shipments of oil. Zombie ships are ships that are part of the ghost fleet, registered under a false name that's been used by another ship or flying a false flag.
Okay, so this ban on Russian oil, and what's the role of the rest of Europe, the G7 and all this?
Well, the G7 price cap, this is an effort to ban Russian oil, but not so much that it would spike global prices. So the G7 price cap targets the services Russia needs to export oil, and I'll explain that in a second. The G7 oil price cap was adopted in December 2022 by the G7, the European Union, other allies, including Australia. But it wanted to cap the price Russia can earn at $60 per barrel for Russian seaborne crude oil. So Western companies are prohibited from providing key services for Russian oil shipments unless the oil is sold at or below that cap. Now, what are these services? Insurance and reinsurance, financing, brokering, assigning a flag and classifying the ship. Now, these services are necessary, and they inhibit the Russian flow of oil, or at least they thought it would, because 90% of the global tanker insurance, most maritime finance, most of the other services, they are controlled by the G7 or by the EU. So the idea was to force compliance globally by denying these services to any ship from Russia that wasn't selling its oil for $60 a barrel.
Now, this seems like it would be a price stabilizing move for the people who are buying this oil.
Well, that's really part of it. They wanted to avoid a supply shock. They wanted to keep the oil flowing to countries like India and China. They wanted to reduce Russia's war revenues, but they also didn't want the shock to be too great for Europeans. In other words, Europe is counting on Europeans remaining supportive of actions against Russia. So they didn't want it to be too much of a shock. But this kind of sanction design has never been used before. So it was the first time out of the stable.
Now, I haven't heard what the U.S. was doing, and it could be anything given the current administration.
Well,
so
yeah,
what's our role?
It's ramped up. Okay. In 2022, the United States banned Russian oil imports. And then it implemented the EU price cap, so it shifted from paying attention to our domestic market to global enforcement. But the way it was until 2023, the enforcement actions were very limited to following paper trails. That is, not actually tracking where these ships were coming from or going, but seeing if they had left a proper paper trail. But then in late 2024, because of growing evidence of evasion, they began to sanction the traders and the shippers. And then just in early 2025, they sanctioned the vessels directly. And this was to close the shadow fleet loophole, which opened up right after those caps were imposed.
Okay, so it doesn't look like there was a lot of effort intended in enforcing these sanctions. It was basically to limit Russia's income, and if they could have done it through paper trails and verification, they would have. But now they've got this ghost fleet. There's no paper trail, so
Exactly.
There's just the boats, and so they're sanctioning the boats. Now these are really bad boats, aren't they?
They're horrible, but the really horrible thing was that EU members were profiting from providing these otherwise derelict ships for the purpose of evading the price cap and other sanctions.
Wow.
This was covered prior to 2025 in the business press, but not in the mainstream press. It finally entered the mainstream because in February 2025, The Guardian published the results of their investigative reporting. God bless them. They showed that ship owners were selling the old ships, and they have made more than $6 billion since 2022 by selling these vessels on to buyers in India, Hong Kong, Vietnam, or the Seychelles. They're not participating in the sanctions. They wouldn't be. And this means that the hulls that would have sold for scrap are now highly profitable. They're worth twice as much as they would be if they sold them for scrap. It turned out that ship owners in 21 of the 35 countries that have placed sanctions on oil trade with Russia sold tankers to this shadow fleet.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, so we got a bunch of very large boats, probably leaky, carrying oil and other things.
Exactly. Right? And it's at that time that the mainstream news reframed the issue from sanctions enforcement to maritime safety and environmental threat. It's a maritime safety threat because these ships turn off their transponders, so you don't know where they are. And there have been some very close calls with very serious collisions. But they're also an environmental threat because these hulls are as old as 35 years. They could start leaking oil. Now, the ships are used to carry Russian oil, conduct espionage for Russia, and chart and sometimes destroy undersea assets such as cables. There are 600 vessels in the shadow fleet shipping 70% of Russia's oil exports. Just to give you an example of what this means, there were two 15-year-old Greek-owned tankers. Now, usually tankers are scrapped at 15 years. They were sold to a Hanoi-based company, renamed and reflagged from Malta to Panama, and collected 120 million liters of Russian oil from a port near the Estonian border. So that's how many layers of deception and fraud there are. Individual shadow tankers are now barred in the EU and US ports because they don't have insurance, constitute an environmental threat, or are carrying Russian oil. But these ships rarely put into EU or US ports. And to date, about 70 individual tankers have been put under sanctions, but if we're looking at 100 vessels, they're not making much of a dent. There's no pending legislation to outlaw the sale of vessels into the shadow fleet because of resistance from EU member states where shipping is an important part of the economy, especially Greece. Greek owners have sold the largest number of these derelict tankers, 127. By late 2004, the estimate of these older vessels, aged around 30 years or more, were as high as 1,000 vessels, all sailing without insurance.
Wait, how did they find all this out?
Well, this is really great. Guardian reported that this investigation was led by a Dutch investigative company called Follow the Money. And you can track these ships, especially when they enter domestic waters. But the full investigation involved newsrooms in 9 countries and the Kiev School of Economics, which analyzed hundreds of maritime freight and ship registration records. So it was a highly collaborative effort.
Now, there's been mentions of this shadow fleet at other times. For example, when one of their Russian submarines, which followed them, broke down, and the British Navy went out and rescued the submarine and towed it into. So we're obviously keeping an eye on this. But what does this have to do with Venezuela?
Well, I do want to talk about Venezuela. I also want to note that the television series, I think it was on Netflix, called The Diplomat, actually followed this case very carefully, made it a high drama episode in who's going to get the submarine first. And yes, they did know this was going on, especially when the ships were passing through the English Channel and heading north. Countries like Denmark, for instance, were well aware. Mm-hmm. But they didn't want to interdict them. For one thing, they needed to keep the oil flowing at a certain level. Mm-hmm. So it was only after this report in 2025 that climate changes, so that politically it becomes more important. Now, how does this relate to our friends in Venezuela? This brings us to the international law of the sea and the Ghost Fleet. Are we engaging in legal action when we seize these ships? The sanctions against Venezuelan oil were first imposed by President Donald Trump in 2019. when the U.S. imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company, effectively cutting off most Venezuelan oil exports to the United States. And this triggered today's sanction evasions, or the ghost or shadow fleet. These sanctions were a major escalation following the disputed 2018 Venezuelan election and recognition of an opposition interim government. These ghost fleet boats from Venezuela go to China and to some other Asian countries. China is the world's largest crude oil importer. Oil is sometimes, if Venezuela is under an embargo, China wants its oil, it gets it cheaper.
Yeah.
A major importer of Iranian and Venezuelan oil is China, using these ghost fleet ships. Now, international law of the sea permits boarding and seizing so-called ghost fleet ships. These ships are more properly called stateless vessels and can be seized on the high seas not because of any sanctions, but because they don't have a valid flag, they're using a false or fraudulent registry, or it changes multiple flags. It is illegal on the high seas to seize a ship if it's owned by a sanctioned entity. If there's a violation of the sanctions of Europe and the ship comes into domestic water, they are also using the ports or trying to use the ports of that country, then they can be seized if they're within domestic waters.
We put these sanctions on Venezuela. What are the underlying reasons here?
Well, I've been looking at this, Bill, and you've asked me the right kinds of questions too, like, is Donald Trump really smart enough for all this?
Yeah, this seems like it is actually thought out very carefully and planned.
Yeah, and first of all, we were told that this was all about drug interdiction, which is why we were dropping very expensive missiles on tiny little motorboats. Remember that episode?
Yeah, well, we ought to, because they killed a lot of people. And it's really ruined the charter fishing industry in the Caribbean.
Well, okay, so we were told that was about drug interdiction, and it started out with fentanyl, and then it turned to cocaine. They couldn't even make up their mind about what kind of drugs were coming out of Venezuela. But we can look at what are the underlying reasons that many analysts give for this attack on Venezuela. Drugs is not one of them. Another unlikely reason is to seize oil for U.S. use. And the reason that's very unlikely, and I know you can add to this because of today's breaking news, American refineries can only refine the kind of thick crude oil that is found in Venezuela. Our refineries in the United States are not capable of refining light crude, which is what comes from fracking. It's because of when these refineries were built.
Okay, I got it. Right.
And also when the pricing changed. Mm-hmm. And suddenly light crude became something worth blowing up your underground land for.
Okay.
American refineries can refine heavy crude. American refineries cannot refine light crude coming from fracking. And so Venezuela was regularly sending its heavy crude to oil refineries along the Gulf of the United States to be refined. But when they couldn't send it here anymore, well, those oil companies found alternate sources for thick crude, primarily from Mexico and Canada, although getting the Canadian oil to our refineries is more expensive. Venezuela, therefore, aligned with China, Russia, and Iran. And I think that's where the real issues come in for why we were attacking Venezuela.
Oh, good. Now let's go behind the curtain. Pull it back. Show us who's there.
I know. We're suddenly on a geopolitical map I don't want to be on, to tell you the truth. I mean, okay, so China's the largest importer of crude oil in the world, and we're telling them you don't get it anymore at a discount from Venezuela. Ha, 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 China.
Isn't it interesting, though, that Russia's been silent about this? I mean, obviously, Putin is not making a big fuss over this.
Well, because they're not interdicting his ships yet.
No, but, I mean, this has immense consequences for his revenue, but it seems like he doesn't want to tip the U.S. further against him because of that other little problem he has.
Yeah, although there was testimony by Fiona Hill in 2019 that reemerged this year. Remember, she was the United States advisor on Russian affairs, and she was testifying that she was present at meetings where Trump and Putin discussed trading Ukraine for Venezuela, that the United States could have Venezuela if Putin could have the Ukraine. Now, obviously, that's changed quite a bit, but I think for Russia, its ships aren't being seized.
No, their revenues are.
Their revenues are, but that's what I mean. This doesn't, Europe just recently put a couple of Russian oil executives under sanction, but does Russia want a confrontation with the United States over this?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's like he's not going to touch this because he wants a favorable settlement in Ukraine, and this shows that Trump is a fucking maniac.
Yes.
So he's got to, if he pushes Trump on this, bad things could happen to him.
Yes.
Okay,
Anyhow, the oil companies in the United States, they don't need Venezuelan oil, and basically, isn't that what they told Trump just today?
Yeah, there was a meeting with oil executives, and speaking for the executives, I think it was the president of ExxonMobil, and he said, this is too unstable, and the infrastructure in Venezuela is inadequate, so that there's no reasonable reason that they would put any money into going there and renovating and trying to sell. And of course, now it's politically unstable to boot. I mean, Trump promised to ensure their security.
The security of the oil companies.
Now, these are big places. That's a big give. On top of that, it wouldn't likely be profitable unless it was secure. A political move that they're already expressing their disfavor of.
Yeah, and I don't know that most Americans want to think about the U.S. military being a guarantor of safety in Venezuela.
For oil companies.
For a number of oil companies, yes. Okay, so what I'm saying is, I don't think this is about oil, even though I think Donald Trump thinks it's about oil. And I will try to unravel that apparent conundrum.
Thank you.
Project 2025.
Oh, dear.
Does mention Venezuela more than once, and the concern with Venezuela is that it is a communist country.
Which tells you the authors of 2025 don't know what communism means.
They also don't know what socialism means, but that's beside the point.
Well, the interesting thing is the United States government just nationalized the Venezuelan oil industry, which is precisely what a communist government would do.
Yeah, I guess that's right. A little bit Stalinist, I'd have to say.
More than a little bit.
Okay. Now, America has been involved in coup attempts against Venezuela in April 2002. I don't know how many people remember this. There were massive protests in Venezuela that led to the removal of President Hugo Chavez. And Pedro Carmona declared himself the interim president, and he represented private business interests. But then the Chavez government was restored within 48 hours by the Venezuelan military and popular mobilization.
Sounds like a failed coup.
I think so. Now, the CIA had advanced knowledge of the coup. It maintained contact with opposition groups, and it did not warn Chavez. President Bush, at that time, approved of Chavez's removal for those 48 hours. Okay.
Well, he made so many good foreign policy decisions.
The man was a genius.
Oh.
We were beloved around the world by the time he left. Okay, so we know that there are people, powerful interests in the United States, who have not wanted any socialist country to take hold in South America or Latin America. That's been our history. But if you want to know who is the key figure in this attack on Venezuela, according to reputable news reports, it's Marco Rubio. According to reporting from the Financial Times and other sources, Marco Rubio, who, if you will recall, is, among other things, the United States Secretary of State, emerged as the central architect and advocate for the aggressive strategy that led to the raid on Caracas and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and his wife. He was the one who persuaded President Trump to shift from diplomatic pressure to military action. His strong anti-Maduro, anti-communist, in quote, stance and long-standing opposition to the Venezuelan government are key factors behind this administration's decision. After the operation, he was described as playing a leading role in overseeing U.S. policy towards Venezuela and what comes next. So he's been described in some reporting as a de facto viceroy, tasked with managing U.S. policy in Venezuela. Now, of course, viceroy has never been used as a term for governing territory in South America.
No, there's a certain lack of cultural appreciation.
Precisely. How does all this work? You were the one who has said to me on more than one occasion, Marco Rubio isn't a stupid man, and Marco Rubio wants what?
To be president next.
Precisely.
The only reason he took this job was because he saw it as a stepping stone, that Trump would be a lame duck, and that this would give him foreign policy experience that he could argue qualified him to be president. The scary thing here is this has got to be one of the dumbest things done in a long time.
Well, but look at what is actually happening. Trump thinks this is about oil. Rubio thinks this is about grooming himself to be the next president of the United States.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it all is happening. I think the people around Trump know he's an idiot. And he thinks in cartoon-like dimensions and colors. So if Rubio goes in and says, this isn't going to work, but we can do a great, quick grab and go, and then we'll seize those oil fields and we'll all get rich, that's what Trump thinks is going on. But
even given that he is not a fool, this is clearly an ideological move on his part.
Totally.
There is no sensible way that this is going to work out. We have put ourselves in the familiar position of trying to manage a country through the puppet government we install, and it doesn't seem like the Venezuelans are going along with it.
Well, it's the kind of thing where things disintegrate fairly rapidly.
Yeah, you could see that.
So
you take a strong man out, and you have his minions who are not under control.
Well, you have his minions who are also jockeying for power.
Yeah.
So it is ideological. First of all, Rubio has an ideological hostility to socialism. Socialism is a no-no. This has a lot to do with Florida exile politics, not just the Cubans, who, after all, are aging out, but the Venezuelans. The Venezuelans who have come to Florida are very happy with Rubio as their senator because he is so anti-socialist. He was very frustrated with the failed sanctions. Also, he does have a fear of Russian, Iranian, and Chinese influence in the Southern Hemisphere. He is politically aligned with Trump and knows it, no matter how he might try to evade it at some point in the future. And he invested his personal credibility in Venezuela's outcome. And from his perspective, attacking Venezuela wasn't reckless. It was long overdue. And you heard him crowing about next it's Cuba.
Well, the interesting thing in that whole package is, first of all, this would be a great thing if he were running for governor of Florida, because there's a constituency that might like this.
Well, that's what I think. You can't win the presidency on the constituency of aging Cubans and Venezuelan immigrants who could be deported tomorrow.
The other thing that's really crazy here is that, these sanctions are never completely successful. They're always going to, quote, fail, because it's not enough to have sanctions to overthrow a regime. You're defunding it, but you're not actually doing anything physical to it. Sometimes we forget that people like Maduro have an army. that are faithful to them and will act.
Yeah.
And it's not about how much oil they sold. It is a criminal enterprise, to be sure, but now you have to put something else in there to provide a bureaucratic infrastructure to actually do anything. And I mean, we've had sanctions on Cuba, and, the number of Cuban exiles still alive must be minuscule.
Well, yeah, and the other thing that I would like to say is, could we remember that one of the biggest beneficiaries of Venezuela using ghost fleets is China getting discounted oil? Now, they're very active in Venezuela. It's not like they're dealing with this situation from afar.
Yeah. And actually, I don't care that they're getting oil from Venezuela, because burning oil is better than burning coal, which is what they're trying to move away from.
The point that I would like to make is there's this huge geopolitical chessboard that we think we can handle like some kind of Warner Brothers cartoon. It seems highly unlikely to me. Oh, the last thing I heard that made me want to I don't know where I would go. I don't know where to flee to anymore, is that some report quoted Trump as saying that he would look favorably upon the opposition candidate who won the Nobel Prize because she said she was willing to give him the Nobel Prize, hers.
This is worse than cartoons. This is utter buffoonery.
But I also think it's distraction. In other words, you had one report say the reason Trump didn't name the opposition leader was because she accepted the Nobel Prize. And the next day she says, well, I'm willing to give it to you. This is all theater.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is, it shows the ideological mindset. Iran is on the verge of collapse right now. It may go down in a day or so. They are not a threat to us. If anything, they're on their own. Russia's not going to get involved in this right now. They got a bigger problem right next door. And playing chess with the Chinese is just a dumb game. They've been playing way too long. Yeah, and they play long ball. And I mix my metaphors there, but these are people who think very, very long term. They're not going to react quickly, but they will react effectively. So, and of course, and our leader is Donald Trump, so we are doomed.
Yeah, and
learn Mandarin as quickly as you can.
There have been huge rifts between Russia and China traditionally. Those are closing. And then you have the prince of Iran telling Trump to get ready to come in. It might be worthwhile to just review our role in Iran because we have been talking about the liability of trying to control the ruler that we've installed in another country and its consequences. So let's just review what happened in Iran and why Prince Pahlavi wants back and thinks the United States should facilitate it. Mohammad Mossadegh was the elected prime minister of Iran in the 1950s. He was very popular with Parliament. He decided that it would be a policy in Iran to nationalize the Iranian oil industry, which at that time was controlled by the British. This, of course, enraged Britain, but it also worried the United States because they saw that it might increase the influence of the Soviet Union. This led in 1953 to a joint operation between Great Britain and the United States called Operation Ajax, which successfully removed Mossadegh from power and installed Reza Pahlavi as the king of Iran. Mossadegh was arrested and tried and placed under house arrest. The Shah went on to rule in Iran with U.S. support and received extensive political, military, economic backing for the following decades. But then there was a revolution in Iran in 1979 because the Shah was a highly repressive ruler. Everything that you think about a kind of thug ruler that we've assigned, of course, right now to Venezuela and legitimized our going in there because of it, you could say about the Shah. So he left Iran in the face of the Iranian Revolution, came to the United States. He was dying at that time of cancer. So in the late 1970s, 1979, the new power who came into Iran was Ayatollah Khomeini, who installed himself in 1979 as the head of Iran, and that's why things are the way they are today.
I mean, when you remove the civilian bureaucracy and you have a strong religious movements are often pretty well organized and their leaders are pretty savvy. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get a theocracy in power.
Yes, and so who wants Iran gone? Israel wants Iran gone. And Trump has shown sympathy with that point of view. And so now what? We're supposed to help put the Shah's son into power.
First of all, it's highly unlikely we have any influence over the power vacuum that might occur if this leader goes down.
Yes, but what I'm saying is Pahlavi is saying to Trump, because Trump said, I love this. Oh, the irony was so rich. We will take action if the Iranian government shoots any protesters. This was within 24 hours of ICE shooting an unarmed woman to death. Okay.
Oh, my God.
I know, you can't believe it.
Yeah, this is so twisted.
And so Pahlavi, taking Trump at his word, said, well, you better get ready to come in. Let's get some boots on the ground here so that I can be king.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, the boots on the ground thing. Trump is doing these things, not realizing that, after you take over a country, the next day after this revolution or transfer, somebody's got to run a water plant and somebody's got to make sure there's electricity. And in other words, all these people have to go back to work and keep the place running or chaos occurs. And you get the kind of situation we've seen in other countries where we decided to visit for a long time with our military and then leave.
Yes, and so, but remember what Trump has in his mind, if we can call it that. He wants to be remembered as someone who brings eternal peace.
Well, he could by croaking.
The point is, this man thinks he's Jesus.
Jesus, I'm sorry.
Or better than Jesus. And so this will be, I'm afraid this might be tempting to him. I think the way that he understands what happened in Venezuela has nothing to do with the machinations behind the scenes by his own Secretary of State.
Just imagine that I thump my head on my microphone.
Okay.
I just don't have the energy. This is terrifying because this is the foreign policy of a delusional, demented, senile, imbecile. And he thinks his construction of reality is the reality we all live in. He has no idea what he's
No, that's absolutely right. And he says that the only constraint on him acting within or without international law, this is what he said to the New York Times, is his own morality.
Oh, boy.
And this is the one that really cracked me up. And he has a good morality because he doesn't want to really hurt anybody. What? Okay, folks.
Man.
Now, the good news is you don't have to listen to any of this depressing news for a little while because Bill and his lovely wife, Susan, are off to Egypt. When are you leaving?
On the 12th. One of those bucket list things.
Okay, folks. So the next podcast that we will be able to do will be at the end of January. So watch for us on January 31st. We hope not too many horrible things will have gone on between now and then, and that you have a wonderful trip in Egypt.
Thanks. And since terrible things are happening every day, the reason we're wishing for that is because it would be such a long podcast and depressing as hell. Thanks for listening today.
Yeah, we wish we could leave you on a happy, clappy note, but seriously, we can't.
And we have worked at trying to put together these pieces, and it's a complex issue. I hope we helped you think about it.
Yeah, work your way through it. So you know whether or not within international law we can seize one of several thousand ghost ships. We'll see you the end of January.